And I'm the author of pybuild. And in the first short part of this talk, I will talk about what pybuild actually is and how it integrates with DH sequencer. And in the second part, I will explain a bit how to customize it. So, pybuild is a wrapper around various build systems. It makes it easier to build Python libraries for different Python interpreters or different versions. It removes auto-generated files like pyc files or egg directories or egg files. You don't have to remove them anymore. You don't have to add Debian options, Debian source options, patterns to remove these files. It configures your source even though this utils doesn't do much. For example, in configure step, pybuild makes sure that the same options are used in all steps, because, for example, this utils has this nice feature that if you pass some parameters to build step, it forgets about them in install step and tries to build extensions again, and pybuild makes sure that it doesn't happen. It simplifies building libraries for Python 2.3 or PyPy a lot. It makes it easier to invoke, for example, not only for this utils build system, but also different build systems like CMake or any custom one. It runs tests, which is something, for example, that the implementation from DevHelper doesn't, because Python has so many standards for running tests that DevHelper just simply ignores that, and pybuild tries to detect the right testing suite, like nose pytest, or if the interpreter is in the right version, then it tries to use unit tests discover thing, which was introduced in Python 2.7 and Python 3.2, if I'm not mistaken. It installs files to the right locations where other Debian tools later expect files. So you don't have to pass install layout dep or any other things that we used to have to do. Quick reminder about what DH sequencer actually does. So we probably in most Python packages already have something like this in Debian rules files, which by default uses Python disutils build system, and the with statement is actually something that chooses the Debian helper, because we don't have Python Central anymore, but we still have Python support, and this is what enables DH Python 2. And what DH sequencer actually does is it invokes these 5 commands, dev helper commands, which try to do their best to guess the right build system and invoke correct commands for given build system. For example, if it detects a if it finds a make file, it will invoke make clean in DH auto clean. It will invoke configure command in the second one, and so on. But the problem with that is it works mostly with one Python version only, or in case CMake, Auto tools and other build system, the only one which actually knows to build for various Python versions and interpreters is distutils. So if there's a setup file and there's no make file, because make file has actually a higher priority, it will invoke the right commands for Python 2. And the problem with that is it doesn't support Python 3, and that's why I wrote pybuild. And the support for Python 2 in Python distributed build system is actually not as good as, it's very good, but it could be better. For example, DH auto test thing that I mentioned earlier. And what this with Python 2 thing does is it invokes dhpython2 command, but the important thing is that it invokes it after all these commands. So pybuild is something that implements another build system for DH sequencer, and dhpython2 and other tools like dhpy support and dhpypy, dhpython3 are invoked after DH sequencer is already done. So that's the reason why pybuild will never replace dhpython2. They simply do different things. pybuild doesn't generate maintainer scripts and so on. So please don't confuse dhpython2 with pybuild, because it's not the same thing. They are doing completely different things. And how to integrate pybuild with DH sequencer? So you actually have to do two small things. First of them is to actually set the build system, because DH will try to use the default one, so you have to pass -- build system pybuild option in order to tell it to use the pybuild build system. If you support Python 3, then you can add this one, but it's not related to pybuild. And the second thing is to create correct build dependencies. The mandatory one is dhpython, and please add it, even though Python 3 package currently pulls that one in, because at some point I want to remove dhpython dependency from Python 3 package. So please remember to add dhpython to build dependencies, and it will also enable newer dhpython2 helper, so you have to do it anyway, and please do. And the other part is actually not how pybuild itself works, but how integration with DH sequencer works. Because pybuild is actually a standalone command, and you can use it even outside DH or CDBS. And DH integration script, which was written in Perl, and I want to forget about it already because it was a nightmare. this script tries to parse Debian control file and checks for build depends. If you add Python there, it will try to build libraries or scripts because it's not only for libraries. You can package Python applications with pybuild as well. If you add Python, it will try to invoke all these commands for Python interpreter, so the default one. If you add Python debug, it will do the same with debug interpreter. If you add Python all, it will check X Python version field in Debian control, and it will invoke all these commands for all requested Python version. The same for Python 3 and PyPy. And there's one special option I want to mention here, which was suggested by Barry, which is name. And this is a really nice option that, because maybe a bit of reminder about how deb helper works. If you have only one binary package, then deb helper will install files to Debian / package name directory. So you don't have to create any install files and so on. But if you add another binary package, so the second one, it will install by default to Debian tmp directory, and it's not Python specific. It's just how deb helper works. And when you have two binary packages, you need to tell deb helper which file belongs to which package, and that's what install files are for. And in case of Python, if you have only, for example, Python 2 and Python 3 package, the install files are quite easy to write. You just have to enter their user lib python 2 .star, and it will install all Python 2 files to this from this directory to Python full package. The same for Python 3. You just have to put their user lib python 3 star, and that's it. But if you happen to build a package for the debug interpreter, it starts to be more complicated. You need to figure the right pattern for debug extensions and so on. It's already complicated when you have debug interpreter, and when you want additionally, for example, move this extension to different binary package, because, for example, the extension is optional, and you want to provide any binary package and another one for extensions, then it's even more complicated. And maintaining this, well, you have to write this install files once, but it's a bit of pain to write them. So another option is to tell pybuild what's the common name of your package. So, for example, if I have Python Macro, Python 3 Macro, Python 3 Macro X, then instead of foo here, I have to put Macro, and the pybuild will know where to install it. For Python 2, it will use this directory. For Python 3, it will use this one, and so on. And it makes really easy to add Python 3 binary packages for packages that already have only one. You don't have to care about install files at all. And that's pretty much it. If you want to, if it's actually most packages for Python usually look like, and we can go to HackLab and add some Python free support if you want. If not, then I'm actually a big fan of customization. I customize everything. My Vim RC file is huge and so on. So that's why I made it possible in pybuild to customize almost everything. And you can customize all these steps. You can provide different commands for each step or only for one of them. You can provide additional parameters to commands already generated for given build system. For example, if you don't want to do the work pybuild already did for CMake or for these utils, you can, and you want to pass one additional parameter. For example, you want to change the directory where scripts are installed. For example, you are packaging a game, and you want to, instead of using user bin, you want to install to user games, or you want to package something for administrators, and you want to use sbin. Then all you have to do is just pass install scripts user games, for example, and you don't have to care about all other parameters. So the thing that the hack I added to force these utils to remember all the options, it will still work. You just have to pass additional parameters and don't care about anything other. You can also tell pybuild to invoke different commands before each iteration of this build step or any other actually. So if pybuild invokes a command to build for Python 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, and you can invoke another command before each of these commands and after each of these commands. So that in the examples later I will show you how useful that can be. I saw a lot of packages which were overriding in Debian rules, overriding these steps and adding for loops which were adding these new commands or passing new commands and new parameters, and this is much easier with pybuild. And almost any action can be disabled. I will show you examples later. You can actually even create your own build system on the fly, just by defining few options. You can tell pybuild to support completely different build system, which is currently not supported by default by pybuild. And how can you customize it? There are two options. You can pass a command line option or you can export environment variables. All of them start with pybuild _. Here's how you do it. The first one is one I like most because it has some additional features, like you can, for example, add underscore and interpreter name or interpreter version here, and it will work only for this interpreter or this version. And if you choose to use the command line, you will have to invoke pybuild twice. And the second way of overriding it is in Debian rules is to pass command line options after the --. So Yeah.
So it's pybuild 3 or pybuild 2 for Python 2? Can you?
It's all pybuild. So, Zico asked if it's pybuild 2 or pybuild 3. No, it's pybuild _ option _ Python 2, for example, or Python 2.4. There will be examples later, so you can pass these options to dhauto install, build, configure, or whatever. And if you use this, it works like any standard Unix tool. So the 2 dashes means I don't care about these options and pass them to the next tool, and it will pass it to pybuild. Another one is to set environment variable inside, in the line where you override the dhauto foo. This way, if you export it in the top of Debian rules file, it will work for all steps. And if you do it like this, it will set this variable only for dhauto install in this case. And as I mentioned earlier, you can also invoke pybuild directly. But if you use the last one, you lose the integration with the helper, so it will not know which interpreters are selected, which versions you want, and so on. So you have to pass it using command line parameters, and this way, if you don't like DH, for example, or need to invoke some really weird stuff, then that's probably a way to do it. Actually, DH integration is doing that, but it feeds pybuild with some parameters parsed from Debian control file, for example. But you can do it by hand as well, if you want. And examples. I already mentioned the install scripts, and that's how you can pass it. Just one note about that. Please remember that you don't have to quote it here in makefile, because I already saw some people are adding quotes, and you don't have to do that. You actually shouldn't do that in makefile. And another example, if you want to, for example, pass test directory to NOSE, because pybuild by default in build step creates a new directory where the build files are copied, are where they stored, and changes current directory to there, so that when you invoke tests, the source directory is not taken into account, because I actually it happened to me more than once that I built something and invoked test, and they failed. And after a while, I realized that I'm actually using the wrong directory, because Python is by default using current files from current directory. It's on the first place in syspath, and it's a common mistake. I did that many times, and that's why in the test stage I changed the current directory to the build directory. And if your upstream maintainer doesn't install tests with library, then you have to tell NOSE or PyTest where to look for these tests. And this is how you can do it in pybuild. Just use test args. So this parameters will be, this option will be added to the NOSE command. And you can actually use variables in this in args, in these options. There are quite few of them, like version dir, build dir, install dir, interpreter. Version you can use version.major, for example, if you don't want the whole thing. It's all described in the man page. You can use it to customize your commands. You can also that's what you were asking about. If you want to provide an option, override an option only for one interpreter, you can do something like this. So underscore and interpreter version, or only the main interpreter, or in version interpreter. The xdesdir is actually an option where you can define a different destination directory for extensions only. So if you want to ship extensions in different binary package, all you have to do is define this variable, and pybuild will do the right thing. You don't have to override DH auto install and move files one by hand, or create very complicated install files and so on. Pybuild does it for you. Another example is 2-to-3. There are many ways to do that. I saw really big scripts in Debian rules that tried to invoke 2-to-3 in a way that it doesn't conflict with Python 2, because if upstream ships, for example, tests only in the main directory, and while you invoke tests, the same directory is used, then they will fail and 2-to-3 is needed, because it's possible that the same script can work in Python 2 and Python 3. But if 2-to-3 is needed and upstream doesn't install it, tests with library, and you can only use a directory from the root directory of this package, then you need to deal with 2-to-3, and you have to do it before invoking tests for Python 3 and reverse it afterwards, because otherwise the tests for Python 2 will fail. And with this simple 3 rules, pybuild will do that for you. So the first line will copy tests from root directory to build directory, and for all interpreters, and the second line will override the first line only for Python 3 packages. So Python 3.3, 3.4, and so on. It will do exactly the same thing, but it will also invoke 2-to-3 in tests. And afterwards, in pybuild after tests, for all interpreters, it will remove this directory. When they are no longer needed, it will just remove it. So that's one of the examples where before and after options are useful. You can the thing that moves extensions to different package is actually customizable as well. So you can tell it you can define extension by providing a pattern, and instead of by default pybuild tries to find SO files with the ABI thing and all other weird things that end in file name. But you can override it and tell it that you think that extension is something with PNG file. So all images will be moved by pybuild to this new directory. Another example, how you can disable things in pybuild, because you can, for example, need Python or Python all in Debian control files build depends, but you don't want to build it for this interpreter. For example, you have a script that uses Python 2, but you build only Python 3 packages. So you have to add Python to build dependencies, but you don't want pybuild to build for this interpreter. And the first line disables Python 2 completely. The second one disables tests step for Python 3.3. For example, if you want to invoke tests for Python 3, but one version doesn't have support in some other dependency because it was not rebuilt yet, or for some other reason you don't want the tests for this version fail and you want to disable it, and just for this version. You don't want to disable the whole thing for Python 3, but just for this version because this one doesn't work. And the second line does exactly that. And you can actually disable many things at once. So if you want to disable in one line, if you want to disable configure step for Python 3, that's the first part here. If you want to disable everything for Python for version 2.4, doesn't matter which interpreter, it may be Python 3, Python 2 debug, and so on. And by the way, if you do that, Python 2, it will disable Python 2, but not Python 2 debug. So if you invoke for, if you build for Python 2 debug as well, then you have to remember that you have to disable debug interpreter as well. And an example of new build plugin, new build system. If you set system to custom and define these parameters, I will not get into details because we have a few minutes left, then you can ignore the build plugins that are defined in pybuild and do something completely new. You can define your own build plugin, and that's actually what build plugins do. If you have something like this and want to share with others, send it to me and I will replace it with a plugin, proper plugin, which will detect if there are some files specific to given build plugin. It will use these commands instead of what it does for other build systems. And before we go into questions, I just wanted to say that I don't need any help with this. I don't want you to write any plugins. I will do it all myself. I will just report wishlist bugs, and I will do it for you. And I really hope that this reverse psychology thing works. So, questions?
just sitting here and messing around with it on one of my Python packages that I maintain already. The one thing that the upstream that I do is they use epydoc, and so I have to override for that. Would that be a situation where you could use the plugins and just override the testing routines that would be done on the install to generate the docs?
pybuild doesn't deal with docs actually, but you can override dh auto build. Tell it to actually invoke the dh auto build so that pybuild does the right thing, and then add one additional line which invokes the command that generates docs. I actually do that in many packages.
I have 2 points. First is, I've just only recently looked at pybuild and very briefly, but the environment variable thing, it seems to me you're using a lot of environment variables. So I mean, in a different context, if I saw a shell script with that many environment variables, I would be inclined to say, hey, let's rewrite this in Python and stop using environment variables. Because obviously you've got...
you don't have to use them. Almost or all of them can be passed as command line parameters. So I just think it's easier in Debian rules.
It's just my general impressions here, but yeah, I mean, with environment variables, I mean, if you misspell an environment variable, you're most likely what's going to happen is the program is simply ignores the variable because you misspelled it. So in other contexts where you have a grammar, you can parse that file and say here's an unexpected token or whatever is not valid here. So it seems there may be some QA issues related to that design choice. Second point I want to bring up is I don't do a lot of Python module packaging. I'm a Python programmer. I don't do a lot of packaging, but I've been doing it for a while. So I might go 2 or 3 years in between actually touching a Python package. And it's happened, several times to me that I will look at, I need to update this Python module or a package or whatever, and there's a new way to package Python modules for Debian. So I'll go and read about this, and I'll be like, okay, so there's
hopefully we have only one, and it will rule the world.
Yeah, this is where I'm heading towards. But
the other ones are either out of the archive or deprecated.
Yeah, and you'll go and look into it, and okay, so there's 2 ways to do it. All right, so which one is the preferred one? You do some more reading, like, okay, some people prefer one, some people prefer the other.
I would suggest to go to this page, and Barry prepared a really nice guide how to use this stuff, and it's very opinionated, but it describes what we think is the best solution. So it doesn't describe all the possible solutions, but it describes something that we think is the right way. If you follow this website, this wiki page, then you are probably fine. And by the way, since this morning, that's what SEDEP generates. I uploaded a new version with some patches which are using pybuild already.
Yeah, I don't mind opinionated. The problem is when there's multiple opinionated positions.
In general, how do you suggest we solve the issue where different people have different opinions?
Yeah, for me, I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily want to take an opinion on everything, but if there's, something where I'm not an expert in, I would prefer to, follow best practices, right?
We go back to Windows.
Well, I said best practices, not common practices.
We have really not so much time, so just a quick question, maybe. If not, then thank you.